Hey guys, wow, what'd you think of that? Newton's laws of motion. To just blow your mind. Look at old Sir Isaac Newton sitting there, very serious, very poofy looking, right? um, but let's see if we can make these laws of motion make a little more sense, okay? Just to give you a little background information, Sir Isaac Newton was one of the most famous scientists that ever lived, and one of the most important things he did was come up with these three laws of motion. Emotion is the act of moving or changing positions. Now you already know that, but just think about it. It's the act of changing positions. And a law is something that's always true. So he explained basically how everything moves all of the time. All right, let's look at his first law. First law of motion. Until a force happens, objects at rest stay at rest, and objects in motion will stay in motion. Now, just think about it. If you sit, let's say you sit a pencil on your desk, okay, or on your table at home, and it sits there and you just walk away from the table, and nobody touches the table and nobody takes the pencil, that pencil will just keep sitting there, right? It's at rest. It's going to stay at rest. Now, if somebody comes by and flicks it with their finger, then it's going to be in motion, okay? So, if something's at rest, it stays at rest. And if it's in motion, it'll stay in motion until something stops it. So it's hard to believe that something in motion could never stop, but that's the case, okay? The reason things slow down and stop is because forces work on them, like gravity or friction. Gravity is what kind of pulls us down to the earth. That's why when you throw something in the air, it comes back down. We'll talk about that more later. But friction is the one I want to mention now. Friction is a force that slows or stop motion when things rub against each other. Like if you rub your hands together, you know how you rub them together and they get warmer? All right, you're feeling the friction between your hands. You're feeling your hands rubbing together, okay? And friction is what slows motion down. And I thought this was a really cool image. I thought this is really interesting because if you feel a piece of paper, it just feels as smooth as it can be, right? But if you look at this image that I cropped in here, this is the edge of a sheet of paper, and it's enlarged 100 times by an electron microscope. So it's a really strong microscope. But paper, paper's made of wood, right? It's made of little wood fibers. So look at what paper looks like when you really get up close to it. It doesn't feel anything like that, right? You don't feel any of that. It just feels smooth and we can write on it. But paper is really, it has a rough surface to it and it causes friction when you roll something across it. Think about when you roll, if you were to kick a soccer ball like down your driveway or down like a paved area, okay? It's going to go really far and really fast. But if you kick it in the grass, it's not going to go as far or as fast because that grass is providing a lot more friction against that ball than that smooth surface would. So if something is resting, it's going to keep resting until somebody puts some force to it and puts it in motion. If something's moving, it would keep moving if it weren't for things like gravity and friction to slow it down. Now let's look at the third one. I'm sorry, jumping ahead. Now the second law of motion. The more mass an object has, the more force you have to move it. All right, now you already know this, okay? You already know it. What it's saying is that the mass isn't always weight. Mass is how dense something is, or how how much matter there is making it up. But it also kind of involves weight. We can kind of think about it with weight with this. The more mass something has, the more force you have to use to move it. If you're just picking up a water bottle, that's not very heavy, right? But if you're going to pick up a big gallon container of water, that's a lot heavier, right? You have to have more force to lift that up, all right? Look at this example, okay? Requires a lot more force to move a car with your foot than it does to move a soccer ball with your foot, right? Moving the car, this would take a lot of force to move this heavy, heavy, heavy object, whereas it doesn't take as much force to move a soccer ball. Now, here's an example everybody can think about, okay? All right. If you are pushing a grocery buggy, it does not take that much force to move that buggy forward. But once it's filled up with groceries, like mine probably will be later today, once it's full, it takes a lot more force to move it. And also, if you've ever going through the parking lot, don't do this without your mom. If you've ever tried to put your feet up on the back of the buggy and like down here and hold onto the handle. When there's nothing in it, the buggy can go kind of fast. But when the buggy's full, it'll pretty much just sit still, even if you're hanging onto the back of it. So if it's empty, there's not as much mass to it, not as much weight. You have a lot less force to make it move. If it's heavy, it's a little harder to move. All right, now the third one. Third law of motion, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. All right, so here's your action, is your rocket exploding, okay? That's your action. The reaction is it takes off. Here, your action is you throw a tennis ball on the ground. It hits the ground, and the reaction is it bounces back up. What if you've got a balloon? Everybody's done this. You've got a balloon, and all of a sudden you're holding it together, keeping the air in it, and all of a sudden you let go of the end of it, and the balloon flies out of your hand. That's because air is pushing out of the back of the balloon, okay? That's your action, and the balloon flying forward is your reaction. So for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So the vocabulary that we learned today in this part of our lesson was what motion is. Motion is the act of moving or changing position. And friction. Friction is a force that slows or stops motion. It's when two things rub against each other. All right. So if you'll move down to your assignment for the day, you're going to do a little work with your vocabulary. Remember, you can always go back into these videos if you need some clues on some of the vocabulary words. See you later.